So good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Chambers. I am a partner at Plant Moran, and I'm pleased to be serving as the 2021 Crew Detroit president. I'm also proud to be serving as a board member for the Crew Network Global Board of Directors. TGIF, it's Friday. We're very excited to bring you our second Fifth Friday event for the year with this very important topic today on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm proud to lead this organization along with my fellow board members in pursuit of our core purpose for advancing women in commercial real estate. Here with us today as part of our webinar includes the following board members: Kelly Herman, our past president, Tori Mannix, Lisa Robach, our president-elect, Rachel Smith, Kim Steiner, Tracy Taylor, Jennifer Thomas, and Jacqueline Trost. The success of our chapter is also attributed to our generous annual sponsors. We are very grateful for their continued support of our organization. At our capstone level, we have CBRE, and Crew Detroit is honored to have CBRE as our capstone sponsor. CBRE is a full-service commercial real estate firm providing solutions to property owners, investors, and occupiers. CBRE's more than 100,000 professionals provide exceptional outcomes for clients in over 100 countries by combining local market insight, broad services, specialized expertise, and premier tools and resources. Thank you to CBRE for your support. At our marble level for sponsorship, we have Bedrock Detroit, Giffords Webster, Nightwatch, JLL, Level 1 HVAC, Plant Moran, Saxey Construction, and Spalding DeDecker. At our granite level, we have AM Higley, Hayworth, HED, Hobbs and Black Architects, Horizon Bank, Knorr, Redico, and Stantec Architecture. And at our Onyx level, which is an exclusive level for minority or women-owned businesses, we have Area, Rose Moving and Storage, T2 Designs, Testing Engineers and Consultants, and Ruby and Associates. So before I turn it over to kick off the program, I did want to just give a quick shout out to some upcoming programs that we have for Crew Detroit. We've got a great lineup as we continue through spring and into summer, and I would encourage you to check out our website, crewdetroit.org, to see all of the wonderful events that we have queued up. A couple that I wanted to mention is one on May 18th. We are going to have a small business walking tour in Hamtramck. So this is really an opportunity to gather in small groups outside safely, where we can have an opportunity to connect, but also share support of small businesses and women-owned businesses in Hamtramck. So that'll be a fun and unique event. Additionally, for our members, on June 3rd, we have our mugshots and martinis in Detroit at Bees. And this is going to be an evening of networking, but also maybe more importantly, an opportunity to get revised headshots, update your image, and also have some fun connecting with other members. And like I said, there's many more events queued up for this summer. And so we hope that you'll check out the website, and we hope to see you in person or virtually at the various events that we have during the year. It is now my pleasure to introduce Holly Tiller, the chairperson of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for Crew Detroit and the property manager for Bedrock Real Estate Services. Holly, take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone, and definitely TGIF. So glad to be able to sit with you for this very important matter that we're going to be discussing. I would first of all like to thank and just welcome everyone here, and welcome everyone who decided to take time out of their day today. So a little bit about our Crew Detroit DEI committee. Basically, our committee is utilizing data, education, action, and advocacy The Crew Detroit DEI Committee is dedicated to cultivating meaningful conversations around issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion to expand our members' understanding and appreciation for all people, regardless of their gender, race, ability, sexual orientation, religion, age, socioeconomic status, or educational attainment. So leading Crew Detroit efforts for inclusivity and promoting diversity within the CRE industry, the DI committee is committed to developing the tools, tracking, and KPIs to keep Crew Detroit moving forward and holding ourselves accountable to our data, education, action, and advocacy goals. As part of that, DEI committee is assessing Crew Detroit's policies and procedures to establish new standardized protocols to embed DEI best practices into every element of our work to support MBE and WBE owned commercial real estate businesses whenever possible. So with that being said, I'm very happy to host this first DEI Fifth Friday conversation. My name is Holly Tiller. I'm with Bedrock Detroit. I am the Director of Property Management, and I am so excited to welcome Leona Medley, who is our Director of Strategic Community Partnerships. For those of you who may not know, Bedrock is filled with a lot of interesting people. And this lady has been the most interesting since I've started here. Wonderful thing about her is that she is a Detroit native. She also focuses on community advocacy tied to economic equity, inclusion, and sustainable development for the residents of Detroit and its surrounding areas. Even though you would never know this, she is no stranger to hard work. She comes from the area of retail where she was working for 17 years. She also attended Detroit Public Schools, and she accepted her first role in public service as the president of her senior class over 24 years ago. She is a graduate of University of Michigan, and she has her BA in psychology. So I am so excited because she also just got nominated for an excellent award with the Habitat for Humanity, which is so very well deserved. So she is a champion for anything having to do with assisting and helping others. So with that said, welcome to the group.
Good morning. Wow. It's so interesting. I put that little tidbit about class president. I was doing an interview and a man, no doubt, referred to it as almost a quarter of a century ago. And I was like, what? Excuse me, you just trigger me. How dare you? But for me, it's always important because it was definitely one of those pivotal moments of saying, here is what servant leadership is about. So thank you, my friend Holly, and I'm so glad to be here and to talk to and share this conversation with the members of Crew. I also want to recognize, because I know she is on the board, is a colleague, Kim Steiner. So we don't get to talk much these days, but I'm so glad to know that she's still doing dynamic work here with Crew. So good morning.
Good morning. So let's get the conversation going. One of the first questions that I wanted to talk to you about is why is, or in your opinion and for what you've learned about, why is DEI such a hard conversation or even complicated conversation to start? Why is it so uncomfortable?
You know, having, led these conversations, Holly, as you know, within our organization last year, we did a book club for all of our leaders. And so we had 136 leaders, and specifically we launched that program centered around this question, right? Why is it so uncomfortable? And we read the book, So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Olu. And, because we don't like being uncomfortable. It is, many times we don't see ourselves. And when I say we, I'm going to talk about people in general, but I am going to separate in terms of race, right? As I've done this work and facilitated conversations, trainings, learnings, and worked with an organization to build strategy processes around diversity, equity, inclusion, what I have found is there is a distinct difference when we need to talk about race. And so oftentimes you will have white organizations, white-led, predominantly white organizations that struggle to talk about it because oftentimes they don't have to operate and engage in a racialized world because of being the dominant race, right? And so you can go in anywhere, you can go into a restaurant, you can go into an upscale department store and operate and not ever really be faced with your race and have that put in front of you every single solitary day of your life. And I've had so many really lengthy and difficult discussions with friends, especially over this last year, with colleagues and many of the most amazing people and my white colleagues asking this very same question and wanting to have this discussion and wanting to maneuver and get over that level of discomfort. And those who have been successful are the ones who have just really decided to face that discomfort head on internally, and ask themselves why, why am I not comfortable? And so what I have found is those two things, right? Not operating and not realizing that we live in a very racialized society. And so if you are never faced with that, or you never have to deal with that, then that leads you to that level of comfort and never having to have those discussions, never having to explain yourself based on your race or or other aspects of your identity. Because I'll liken it to, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as women, since we're here in Crew, we don't shudder to talk about that aspect of our identity, right? We can really strongly talk about our role as women, and that's an aspect of diversity, right? And so Crew is talking about diversity. Crew is discussing and dealing with diversity. It is when we get to the intersectionality of our identity, when we layer our gender with other aspects of ourself, right? Whether that is our race, whether that is our sexual orientation, whether that is our level of ability, if we're differently abled. So when we begin to layer on other dimensions other than just gender, those other ones could be difficult. But what we find is oftentimes race is the most charged one, and the one that we have the most difficult talking about.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I remember when we started on with that, reading that book and then having our breakout sessions with different organization leaders all across Bedrock. It was a very quiet type of when everybody got to, so what do you think about this chapter? And some of those chapters were pretty hard hitting. They did have some things that I was like, ooh, I wonder how people are going to feel about this. But what was so good to see is to have those questions being asked, and then also to say, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
Oh, I never even thought about it like that.
I'll even layer on another aspect. And so, for me in the book club, we had, 100 plus leaders every week coming to this, virtual classroom or virtual space to talk about this book. And, the reason we did it is to help our leaders become comfortable talking about race at work, because now where things like religion, politics, and race were taboo to talk about in a workplace, now we were saying, okay, we can't ignore race. And we had taken the stance that, team members were going to come in daily, and especially Black team members were going to come in daily with this load on their shoulders. And would we be able to serve our team members properly if we didn't provide them a space when they were at work? I mean, you would come into work that morning and something would happen. There would be a police shooting. There would be, the news was littered with all of these daily events. And so we needed to provide a space. But before we did that, we needed to make sure that our leaders were equipped, because one of the worst things that you could do in a conversation about race is do it incorrectly and not prepare. And so we wanted to make sure that our team members and our leaders took time to prepare. And what we call fail forward, right, was we created this space where there was nothing but leaders so that we can all fail forward and have those discussions and conversations together. It didn't mean, like we were not changing people's, beliefs drastically. A lot of what we found during that engagement is taking individuals who wanted to have discussions and who were allies, specifically our white women and male leaders, and they just didn't know. And we found great success. I spent hours talking to people after, and they would say, how can I share this with my family? How can can I get my wife this book? Can I share these questions with my wife? I want to talk about this with my children. And so having experiences like that, where now we are taking our leaders in this space and saying, we want you to go out and provide a safe space for team members who are loaded down about this issue. And then one other point I'll say too, when we talk about race and why it's so difficult, we failed forward in that case study, I'll call it, in talking about race at work, because oftentimes as I would jump around from room to room, making sure, or not even making sure, just sitting back listening, and I wanted to really take in the experiences of our leaders and how the different discussions were going. I would often walk into the Black team member leading the discussion. And so I would step in and say, we need to ensure that as the space with our leaders, that we are not making the individuals who are carrying the burden of race carry the burden of this discussion. And so while we want to share, and there's definitely a time for you to hear the experiences of Black team members in the workplace and society at large, we want to make sure that this is a space for those who don't have those experiences to talk, because and to share and to be able to lead those discussions. So there's so many nuances and so many layers to preparing and being prepared to talk about race. It is not a thing that you just jump into. Because oftentimes I would have team members that would call me. I remember one team member specifically calling crying because she was attempting to talk to her family about things that were going on. And her family was not receptive. And she really wanted her family to understand and to see things from a different view, and to listen to her. And she was just crying. And I said, these are not discussions that you can go into unprepared. You have to spend time consuming intelligent information on the subject. And you have to read and you have to educate yourself, because for people who have never engaged in racialized discussion, just going into that and trying to base it off of emotion and not off of history and knowledge of history will oftentimes lead you down a rabbit hole and will be more destructive to relationships and that conversation than supportive.
Got it. And I think that's what was so important, is that, people always want to hear, what's the experience? Or that happened to me. I didn't feel that way. So a lot of times as a team member, we were put in that position where we're like, oh my God, I didn't even think that would happen. So it was very good to hear that, hey, you don't have to be the one to teach anyone about the racial experiences that you've had in this country. You're just here to hopefully help facilitate and open. Oh, and one more thing that I did forget to announce to everyone that has joined, my wonderful partner in crime, Rachel Downs, is here to facilitate any questions that you might have. So please put them in the chat. We're going to get to all the questions at the end of our discussion, and we will be able to answer whatever questions that you might have. So please get involved, answer questions. So just a little side note for that. So one thing that I wanted to bring up, because it's obvious that DEI matters. There's so many people who are here, many business leaders who are woefully unconscious to how the different business world is for Black, brown, and women of other marginal groups. So I guess my biggest thing is that with the way that we see our world, including Crew, as being just, this champion for women's rights and us being at a seat at the table, that type of conversation in a company that does not have that, how is that mentored on? Is it based on just having one person who comes in and says, hey, we don't have enough representation of all groups of people? Or what do you think about that?
So my approach to this work doesn't, representation is, is the last thing. My approach to this work is, although, when we look at it as DEI, my approach starts with inclusion, because inclusion is the way that the company ensures that those groups will feel as though they belong in the organization. Inclusion is the component of this work that makes sure that when you get the diverse talent, that they will stay. Inclusion is what will ensure that individuals, whether across all of the different identities, have a space in the workplace. And so oftentimes this work is led by diversity, and which is simply numerical, right?
Yeah.
You can have a diverse organization and absolutely not have an inclusive organization, meaning you can have an organization that is 50% women at all times, but if you look at the turnover, your turnover in women could be higher than your turnover in males. And
Okay,
so
let me stop you there. You have to repeat that point again, because that is such a true statement. It could be diverse, but doesn't mean that it's inclusive. So I'm sorry, go ahead. That was a
yeah,
good point.
yeah, I mean, and so this idea of diversity is, we want to get to diverse organizations. We want to have organizations that are numerically representative of the different identities that we see in society at large, right? And when I say diversity, I'm talking about all of it, right? Not just gender, not just racial. I am talking about neurodiversity, right? So do we have organizations that are bringing in and are inclusive to individuals who have different neural capacity, ability diversity? Do we have organizations that are inclusive of individuals who are differently able? So diversity is diversity is diversity. That is a numerical thing, but you can have that. But if your organization is not inclusive of those individuals, they won't stay, right? And so for me, looking at this from the intersection of business need and social need, it becomes a competitive advantage when you are not continuously experiencing the cost of turnover and the rehire cost, because yes, you have a program and you're saying you're diverse and you are going out recruiting Black women for your organization. But when Black women come in your organization, they experience, cliques, and they can't get into the cliques, or they're experiencing microaggressions. I can tell you in my entire career, I've experienced microaggressions about my hair, about my speech, about, my facial expressions. So you bring Black women into the organization, but that organization has not addressed some of the cultural cancers that will take Black women and have them leaving those organizations, or have them in those organizations completely unhappy, right? And so inclusion is really the leader of this DEI work, because that is the work before you get the diversity. That's the work that you do before you start recruiting and hiring, or developing a strategy for hiring. I had a conversation with one such leader who is really aware of their role as a white female, and we were talking about some diverse statistics for this leader's team, and it was primarily female, but it was all white female. And when we began to talk about, and so we could say, you got gender covered, right? And as a matter of fact, what we were talking about, is you have males are in the minority. So why is that, right? Why are we not more gender diverse on this team? And so we talked about that, but then we got to racial diversity. And that was an area in which we were able to really say, if you were to bring a young Black male or an older Black male on this team, would they fit in? Would this team embrace this person? Would this older Black male be able to come on this team, and the team that is already here, the people that are already here, embrace them and their differences? Would they be able to come on this team and not be ostracized or put on the side because they're not a part of this clique that's already there. And so we can go and hire, our company can put out a job rec and say, we specifically want to recruit and fill these type of positions with individuals with these type of characteristics or identity. But if they come into the organization and they're experiencing microaggressions because of how they talk, are they experiencing microaggressions because of how they dress, are they experiencing microaggressions because of their hairstyles or whatever you may have, or because of their economic status or because of their background, because maybe they don't come from a wealthier background. And I'm not even talking about everyone in a monolith, but I'm talking about the different levels that we always have to think about when we're trying to bring in diverse people into the organization. It's not just as simple as who's not at the table, but it's when they're not here, who's not at the table, how do we make sure that they want to sit at the table and that they want to stay at the table, and that we continue to ensure that we provide a space and an environment where they can thrive. And so diversity is great, but diversity without inclusion is, like Kool-Aid without the sugar, right?
Right.
Sour.
Right, exactly. And that's so important because, you want to be able to feel safe in the environment you're in. You don't want to have to feel like, you have to put on this air or be different when it
Code
comes
switching.
to
We call it code
switching.
switching, right?
Yeah,
Right. I want to be able to speak how I speak. I want to be able to talk about my lived experience and shared experiences and enjoy talking about mine, just like I enjoy hearing about those of my coworkers, and I want them to be received. I want my work and my contribution to be received, but I also want to come into an environment that's free from having to explain things about me that are natural when I am in my environment at home and everyone understands and relates to. And I want to feel safe. I want to come, there's this discussion about coming as your authentic self. And for many of us, it's always trying to determine who that is, right? What does that mean, becoming as my authentic self? And for me, what that means is not having to diminish the person that I am through changing how I talk, by changing how I dress, by not being able to share about my background and my experiences and feel proud of where I've come from, and being able to come into this environment and not diminish or have to hide that for fear that it's going to be judged or it is going to hold me back because it is not a typical experience that the majority of people in the organization have. And so that may mean different things for different people, but inclusion allows it to mean different things for different people in the work environment.
Yeah, it leads me to believe that billboard they have from UWM on the freeway on the Lodge, right as you get ready to get off at Leonard Street. The billboard says, "Here you can be who you are, be yourself." And it's very, when you see that billboard, you're like, wait, do people not go to work being themselves? But,
Absolutely, they don't.
Exactly. But, in our experience or the experience that you've had, it's always been, well, you don't want to appear, as a lot of people say, too ghetto, or you don't want to appear, like you don't have any home training, as my mother used to say.
Right.
So you do have to come in with this because you feel like if you don't, it might hurt you from getting any type of promotion or any type of exposure in the job that you're at. So I think it's a very important point, because being your true authentic self when you come to work should be welcomed.
Man.
And I think that's one thing that, here at Bedrock, we do very well, and we're getting even better. So
yeah, and listen, no company is perfect, right?
yeah,
No company is perfect because, companies are a culmination of people, and each person brings their own biases to work. They bring their own prejudices to work. And so, we are not immune to that. No company is immune to that. And
exactly.
that's why, and then we get to that piece of well, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna say inclusion, diversity, and then we start to talk about equity. And the equity piece has really been a component of education over the last few years, because we always talked about equality. And now we are really in this space of differentiating equality and equity and what that means, and replacing, you know, equity with equality, because it is a vastly different thought process. It is a
Right.
vastly different practice. And so when we talk about the equity portion in DEI, and equity is saying, what do we need as an organization to do to ensure that people from different backgrounds have an opportunity, and not just have an opportunity, but how can we layer on, what do we need to do in addition to compensate for the systems that have been put in place that have stripped opportunity from groups, right? That have
Right.
marginalized groups. And so when you have, you know, marginalized groups, you can't just talk in terms of equality, because if I live in a neighborhood that is, you know, been a result of redlining and urban renewal. And so my neighborhood is underfunded and there is disinvestment in my neighborhood. And so I go to a school that is struggling and that is underfunded, but I do graduate and I go to college, and I don't have access to all of the scholarships, or I did not get them. I didn't have the GPA. I did whatever those things are that I did not have. And so I go to college, but maybe I don't have the network, right? Because I don't come from a background where my family worked in these corporate spaces where they were making these connections. And so we know that hiring is often referral based. And so I didn't get the referral. My family didn't know the people who were in the positions to refer me to the job at Quicken Loans, or to refer me to the job at CBRE, or any of the other commercial real estate companies. And so I have to try to work to get there. And so then I get there, but when I start, the person who's my same age is ahead of me because they got a referral, or they had the internship, right? They got to the table. I mean, when we talk about equity, we got to think about how even our children are starting 50 yards back, 100 yards
Behind.
back,
Yeah.
right? We're not at the finish line. And then if we get to the starting line together, you know, I got a little weight on my ankles, and so I can't run as fast as you can, because I don't go to school with, you know, the tablets and all of the access to technology. When we think about Detroit, right, how is there ever going to be equity for students in Detroit, knowing that there is a digital divide in this system? How is there in the city? How is that ever going to happen?
Exactly.
And so if you are hiring someone from the city of Detroit, knowing that that student came up through a system that they couldn't even have access to the internet, that our schools have to do so much more just to get our students basic access. And so we're talking about BIPOC children, Black, Brown, and Indigenous children. And so how are we going to talk about equality when we don't even have the same opportunities? We don't even have the same access. And so, you know, when we are layering on all of these things of D, E, and I, you know, I think about the intersection of Crew here, Crew, an organization that is elevating the role of women in commercial real estate, right? And so it's important for those in this organization to look around and say, okay, we are talking about women, but how do we ensure that this is not just a conversation about white women, and that those white women in the organization and in our organizations are looking around and saying, okay, we need to ensure that all women are coming along, are here at the same time, right? I think about women's voting rights. That was an example of some lack of allyship and ensuring that all women got voting rights at the same time. It did not happen, right? And so when we talk about women's suffrage, we need to make sure that we are looking at the actual date of when all women got the right to vote, not just white women. And so we have to, as we look and we want to be progressive about the role of women, it is of vital importance that white women are ensuring that all women are brought along at the same time, and that if there are advances that are happening for white women getting into positions and leadership positions and board level positions and CEO positions and commercial real estate, that we're saying, how is this impacting all women? How are Black women, how are Indigenous women, LGBTQ women, women that are differently able brought here? How do we make sure that this is for all women and not just this one identity of womanhood? Womanhood has many identities that we need to ensure that we're working for at the same time.
Absolutely, because we're all in it together. You know, we learn the most when we talk about allyship. You know, you get to where you're supposed to, then you bring two others with you, you know, and making sure that there is some type of connection between that promotion that's happened for you and other women that you can help bring along the way. So I think that's an excellent point when you come with dealing with women as a whole. It's more than just, you know, you getting that promotion. You got that promotion for all of us, because we need to make sure that we're continuing to bring others forward with you. So
Yeah.
speaking of that, with allyship, what is your opinion as far as allyship? What do you think is one of the biggest reasons why we don't see so much support from those women that do get their promotions, or they are not able to bring others with them?
I don't even, you know, like, allyship is a word, and I have, you know, in my practice, I have gotten even more progressive with it. I think allyship is the starting point, but I think we need co-conspirators, right? Allies, if you know, and if you think even about politics, allies switch sides, right?
Right.
Allies oftentimes can be self-interested, right? And so they are looking at things that advance, you know, their agenda, but also could advance the agenda of someone else. Right? Co-conspirators have some skin in the game.
Yes.
Co-conspirators are individuals that are putting something from their life on the line as well, right? They are not just being off to the side. And allyship is a really great word to talk about. But I think when we are looking at dismantling the roles of you know, racism and gender bias in corporations and in society, it has to be where there is some skin in the game, and working towards these things has to possibly impact you as well. It can't be, well, I just did this thing and it didn't work, and so I'm just, you know, I did my thing, I raised my hand and did my thing. You have to have some skin in the game to do this. You have to,
Absolutely.
you know, we talked about this thing that was uncomfortable. We talked about this thing that was, you know, why we don't talk about this. You know, allyship is still allows you to be comfortable, right? Allyship is the one where you may not speak up in a meeting if you hear someone talking about another individual in a disrespectful or abusive way. If you hear some prejudice come out from someone's mouth, or just some racism or some hate, some sexism come out, you know, so allyship may have you say something after and say, oh, you know, I heard that and I really didn't think that was appropriate. Co-conspirator will have you saying something in the moment, will have you saying something at the table, because allyship still has a component of comfort in it. And we've seen that, and allyship is not bad. It is a good thing. And it oftentimes is a starting point to get to that level where you are willing to, you are willing to put your hand in the fight. You are willing to put everything in the fight, not just the component that is emotional support, or that allows you to support in a way that's still comfortable. And so for me, it's important that I align myself with people who are willing to be, you know, co-conspirators, who are willing to sit with me at the table and put some skin in the game and plan this together. And how are we going to ensure that when we go into this space, that we are making way for other people, we are making way for diverse backgrounds, we are talking about the intersection of all of our identities, and we are checking racism at where it's at. We are speaking truth to power at the table. We are not waiting. And that's really co-conspiratorship to me, which is, I think, the only way for us to advance these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace that touch on all of our different identities as women, not just our gender, but that intersectional part of who we are, right?
Right. So I know that it was a great point. I'm going to have to use that co-conspirator. So I'm writing that one down. That's a good one.
Listen, it is borrowed
That's
from
a good one.
someone else, and I have latched on to it.
Yeah, definitely see the difference in it. So one of my last questions that I'm going to ask you, what are your top 2 tools that you might have in your little pocket of arsenal that basically can be used to help facilitate conversations like this?
Yeah. So the first one I would say is belonging, right? Because, and I say belonging because it is that space where I realize that we all have different backgrounds, we all have different upbringings, and I want to always create that space, no matter what a person's views are, where we can have a discussion and we can have a conversation. And so I'm always looking for, how do I create a sense of belonging within our organization and team members, so that if they want to come and talk to me and maybe their views are vastly different from mine, do they feel like they can come to me and share that? And then we can begin to have a discussion and find a path forward in that discussion, especially if we are looking for some common ground on driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's really grounded in belonging. And number 2, I would say, is being not afraid of the conversation. I am not afraid to talk about race. It is something that I live with every single solitary day of my life. And so I am not afraid to talk about that and have that conversation. But because I ground it in belonging, I understand that others may be afraid, may be uncomfortable with talking about that. And so those two are intermingle, and they just circle around each other constantly, so that I always am looking for a way to create an environment where I will have any conversation with anyone about it, but I also will listen, right? I am willing to be educated in those conversations. So I know that this is not a subject where we have to worry about being experts. I think this is a subject that we all are learning and growing in, and education is an important part. So I feel like I gave you 3. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. No, definitely. We'll take all 3, because I think it matters so much that people start to feel like they have a place where they can, be safe and talk about whatever things that might come to them. I've made some wonderful conversations and connections with people when it comes to talking about being in this country right now at this moment, and having those conversations with people who I never thought would even be interested. So it's been really encouraging, actually.
Yeah, it's tough. I've even, as a person in this work, there have been some spaces, I don't, tune into everything. There was a discussion with Stephen Henderson about not being able to watch the Derek Chauvin trial, and I wasn't. It was too emotionally charged for me, and there's time when I also have to protect my emotional well-being in some instances, and so that was a case where I couldn't watch it, but I also had a lot of guilt not watching it. And so there was always this, push and pull about whether I do and whether I don't, and how do I protect myself emotionally in these cases and in these spaces where some of these situations are so triggering and so damaging to your, mental well-being. There are times when you just do have to take a step back and recharge. So it's not about consuming every single solitary thing, because I want to protect, and provide a safe space for myself as well.
Yeah, and that's important because that's one thing I think we as women don't do that a lot, or do well, at least I know I need to work on it, is being able to separate
Yeah,
ourselves and say, hey, I need a break from this. I need to step aside just to, and not feel guilty about it,
right,
because
right.
we're women, we're super women. We do everything that we're supposed to do at one setting, and it's hard when we don't, rely on that.
Yeah.
So we are going to turn it over to get some of these questions. We got some great
Okay.
points in the chat.
Okay.
Rachel, she there? So Rachel had said, great. Oh, here she goes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience in the business world. I think that as a white woman who seeks to be a co-conspirator, every day I look for opportunities to promote Black women.
Yeah.
And as a broker,
Mm.
I apply that brokering skill to opportunity. How can I place women in positions of influence, power, and opportunity just by making a simple introduction?
Mm.
And, whether it's connecting folks on LinkedIn, forwarding professional opportunities that, cross my desk. We have to be very intentional about taking the time and closing the loop to make those things happen because it matters.
Absolutely.
Um,
That's powerful.
Thank you. And I would say that I'm really proud of the work that our chapter is doing. Our committee, we've been meeting for a year, and this was, not a necessarily a new topic for the organization. We'd been working on addressing diversity and inclusion, both at the chapter level and at the network level for several years. But, as we all know, the murder of George Floyd really provided a cultural inflection point
Mm-hmm.
where true leaders recognize that they could no longer be willfully ignorant. And if they were serious about, building successful companies that are inclusive, they had to educate themselves. So
Yeah.
it's been a real privilege to work with Holly and Danis and meet you, Leona. But to that end, I really would love it if you could, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context here. So 10 years ago, I was selected to be the original program director for the Detroit Revitalization Fellows Program at Wayne State University. This was a leadership and community development initiative that was designed to add capacity to the government and nonprofit organizations at the forefront of Detroit's revitalization. Hindsight's always 2020. I was not the right person to lead that work as a white woman, but that's where we were as a cultural norm in 2010. I'm very proud to say that so many of the revitalization fellows that I had the again privilege of working with are in super important and influential positions in community and economic development now. But to that end, I remember very clearly that many of them, again, the approach that we took, we recruited community and economic development professionals from across the country. Most of them had advanced degrees from the very best universities. We did have diversity in that cohort, but not diversity that was reflective of Detroit. And so I remember they really, struggled with the fact that they had picked up their lives and their families to come to Detroit and contribute and make a difference. And some of the, feedback that wasn't really comfortable and not necessarily welcoming, because, you know, Detroiters who have been here the whole time, and I can tell you now, having, you know, been involved in community and economic development for about 15 years, Detroiters show up. And they've been showing up in their block clubs, in their churches, taking care of each other, taking care of their neighborhoods. And just because it looks different than what the suburbs would define as, you know, success or revitalization, I would argue that, frankly, you know, Detroiters care more, care deeply, and put the effort forth day in and day out. But to that end, can you speak to the importance of recognizing the harm of gentrification and how we can incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into community and economic development in a way that's respectful?
Yeah, man, that is a very important discussion. So I will, you know, it's really how to start this. There is a fear I feel, and this is, you know, a lot of my experience and my lived experience in this work, of of elevating Black culture and celebrating it. And that's what I've seen here in Detroit. And I've lived in this city my entire life. And so when we talk about this work of community, of development, economic development, everything that you said is so on point to why there is this tale of two cities. Because it is a city that residents who have lived in this, you know, 84% Black city, and if you include other BIPOC groups, you are upwards of 95% individuals of color. It's a city that is built by people who have said that the way that, and not intentional, I don't think, right? We all come with our own lived experiences. We all come with our own knowledge, but that have elevated their lived experience and what they see as valuable over what those who live here. And not whether it is a willingness, understanding, desire, whatever the motivation is, but the outcome is to create a space, to create a Detroit that mirrors a suburb, that mirrors another, as opposed to coming into the city and amplifying what is here and supporting what is here. And so I'll say that I had a conversation last year with an amazing person, Lauren Hood, and we hosted that in Bedrock. And it was on this topic of preserving Black space. And so in a city like Detroit, if you think about other areas, you know, we will build up a area that is focused on the Latinx community because we have culturally decided that is there's a part of the Latinx community that we celebrate, right? We celebrate the food. We have Cinco de Mayo coming up, and we'll celebrate Cinco de Mayo. As a matter of fact, we even have in our organization a conversation that's going to be hosted by one of our ERGs that is talking about how we are appropriating Cinco de Mayo, but just in the vein of, we will celebrate Latinx community. We will go to places that will celebrate Asian communities in America. We will go to places that will celebrate, you know, if we think here in our area, we have Hamtramck, and it is celebrated for its cultural richness. But then when we think about Black culture here in Detroit, Black heritage, Black identity, it has been deemed that Detroit doesn't need to celebrate Blackness and Black culture, that Detroit should be more multicultural. And so then for me, that says, well, where then is Black culture celebrated in this Black city, this highly populated Black city? And so when you talk about this role of community building, it has removed the voice of residents. It has removed the self-governance of residents and the self-determination of residents and how community should be built. And it's not just a layer of race. When we put economics on that, it even further destroys and hinders the ability for individuals to be able to control and have input. You know, we talk about Detroiters having a seat at the table. How are you invited to a table in a city in which you are the predominant population, right? Isn't it your table? If we were going into another community and we would look at the individuals who were predominant, we wouldn't say we want to give them a seat at the table. They would be giving outsiders a seat at the table. And so somehow in this city, and specifically related to Blackness, it is reverse. And so when we think about community and we think about economic development, we have to change that. And Rachel, you said one of the things that I was on a panel with some U of M students talking about impact investing, and that was my advice. When you go into a space, think about, the comfortable part is think about what we have in common, right? We talk about that all the time. But when we're talking about this work of community building, think about the difference, what you don't have in common, because the difference is where you need to learn. And so I know I went long on that. I hope it answered your question. And I know there are tons of questions in the chat.
No, we just had one more question. And for the sake of time, Janice had asked a question about evaluating or measuring progress within your organization. And Janice, because we are 1 minute before 10, I'm going to send your question over to Leona, and we're going to send you the answer to that, because I feel like it's very important within any organization that you're able to measure the change that you are doing inside that organization, especially true progress. So I think that's a very important part that we should definitely touch on. So I do apologize that we weren't able to.
I have one quick answer for that. One quick answer. What gets measured gets done.
Oh,
that's
there
the answer.
You go. That's the
what
answer.
Gets measured gets done. If you don't measure it, it's not important and it won't get done.
There you go. So that's the best way to look at it. I like that one-liner. What gets measured gets done. So once you put a measurement towards something, then you know for sure someone is watching those numbers and it's going to be done. So perfect answer. Well, thank you so much. The time has come for us where we're going to end. I'd like to thank Jennifer Chambers for jumping on, Kelly Herman for also allowing us to have this time to be together. We hope we learned something from this. And again, the DEI committee is welcome and opening of all people. If you want to join the committee, we're here. We're trying about making change into crew, and of course, the national level as well. Thank you for taking time out. Thank you, Ms. Medley, for joining me this morning. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to do so. And thank you, Rachel Downs, my partner in crime, and answering whatever questions that she had as well. And other than that, have a good day.